tremendous chus for me to be able to be here today. I take a look, I feel like I'm in New York. Such Hamish Bachram, such wonderful, I can see the Shechina on so many of your faces. Just walking in here is mamash's chus and a thrill. I'm going to tell you something. I know that me and Rabbi Zemel are going to be embarrassed in a second, but I still got to tell it to you. Many, many years ago, when the Rosh Yeshiva was born, I was called to be his moel. And I will never forget, he was in Philadelphia at the time. His parents were living in Philadelphia. And I had a very, very tight schedule. And the only way that I could get there in time was to take a little plane. I don't think in my life I was ever on such a small plane. And I remember getting on the plane. You know, you're used to these big planes. I think they were like, I don't know, maybe 30 seats on the plane. And I said to the stewardess, are we going to make it? And she said to me, you know, I also want to get there. So I could never forget that. And to be reunited, so to speak, after all these wonderful years, and to see how Rabbi Zemel has become such a Marbitz Torah and built such a wonderful yeshiva of Torah and Chesed is just something very special. So I want to tell you a very interesting story that could give us a great insight to what we have to become and what we can become. In 1903, the Sfas Emes was the second Ger Rebbe, and Rahman al-Litzlan passed away. Now in Poland, from the biggest Hasidim, the largest amount of Hasidim were the Ger Hasidim. And of course it was a tremendous tragedy. And what was even worse than his dying was that he died really very young. Now I'm going to tell you his age, and most of you will think that's old. But really, in the lifespan of the average person, it's not really that old. He was only 56. And at his funeral, his son was there. His son, Rabbi Avram, who would become the YMS. He would be the next Ger Rebbe. And he was walking with his brother, Rabbi Tzalel. They were walking to the Kvura, to the burial. And as they were walking, Rabbi Avram, the future Ger Rebbe, the YMS, said to his brother, Rabbi Tzalel, at least our father had Arichas Yomim. Arichas Yomim means length of days. So his brother said, what are you talking about? He didn't have Arichas Yomim. He only lived to be 56. Listen to the genius answer that the Sfas Emes gave it, that the YMS gave his brother. He said, I didn't say that our father had Arichas Shonim. I said that our father had Arichas Yomim. Arichas Shonim means length of years, living to be 80, 90, 100. Arichas Yomim means length of days. No one in the entire world can guarantee for themselves Arichas Shonim. Nobody knows what tomorrow brings. But every single one of us in this Heilige Beis Medrash can guarantee for ourselves Arichas Yomim, length of days. And that's what Rabbi Avram was telling his brother. You see, we've come together in the time of Sfira, and we count every night. But we have to know that the main thing of Sfira is not only counting every day, but making every day count. Every day, if you make every day count, that's Arichas Yomim. And every one of us can guarantee that in our lives. We can make the most of every day. And if that's the case, it makes no difference how long a person lives. My own father, Olav Shalom, when he died, I was only 21. And he was only 47. Now, when you're 21, you think 47 is an old man. But as we all get older, we realize how young 47 is. But he was also a person who didn't have Arichas Shonim, but he certainly had Arichas Yomim. And that's what I would like to talk about. How do we get Arichas Yomim? What does a Yid do for Arichas Yomim? So I'll tell you something very interesting. You know, the Chavetz Chaim once wrote in Sefer Avas Chesed, and he writes a very strong lashon, and he doesn't always begin a paragraph with this word. It's in Sefer Avas Chesed, Perikut Beis, and he writes like this: Uma'oid. Uma'oid means it's very important. Tzarech li zoher. A person has to be careful. Not one day should go by. Every bacher here, every Rebbe here, every person that's going to listen to this presentation from today on, you have to make sure that you do a chesed for another yid. That's one way of making sure that you have arichas yamim. And then the Chavetz Chaim adds that just like a person has to do a chesed every day, tzorich ish ha-Yisraeli, a Yiddish person has to be careful to be kaveya itim la Torah every day. Now, of course, you guys are in the Yeshiva, and you're in the Beis Medrash, so of course you're learning every day. But this is something that you have to remember, especially on vacations, and especially when there's no Yeshiva, that there's no such thing as a Yid going without chesed and without Torah every day. And I'll tell you something so amazing. You know, the Bnei Yissaschar asks a question. Why is Sfira 49 days? Where does that come from? Why not 59? Why not 39? Why not 17? Where does 49 come from? And it says something so remarkable. And he says that in the Mishnah in Avos, Perik Beis, Mishnah Tes, it tells us that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and I will ask you this question. Tell me what you would answer to this question. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his Talmidim, what is the best midah that a Yid should have? Anybody have any answers? If I told you what's the most important midah that a Yid should have? So a number of Talmidim gave an answer to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. One said, have an ayin toiv. Have a good eye. Don't be jealous of other people. Sometimes a guy has a better family than you have, more frum relatives, or more mazel, or more money. Don't be jealous. Be happy for the person. Sometimes a guy seems to be smarter than you. Don't be jealous. Eventually you could get there too, and we're going to talk about that. But then, yeah, go ahead.
A good heart.
What?
A good heart.
Did somebody tell you that?
Yeah.
Okay. At least you're honest. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, when he heard Rabbi Eliezer ben Aruch said, you should have a leiv toiv. Yeah, go ahead.
Seeing the future?
I'm sorry?
Seeing the future?
Seeing the future? I'm sorry?
Royas
Hanoila. It's also a very good answer. But okay, let me just tell you what he says. The Bnei Yissaschar said that the mission Novos Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said leiv toiv is the answer. And listen to what he says. You got to fasten your seatbelts to hear this. It's amazing. Leiv, how much is B'gematria leiv? How much is leiv equal? 32. How much is toiv equal? 17. 32 and 17 is 49. He said, oh, that's why we have to have 49 days in Sfira. Because this is the avodah of during the time of Paysach to Shavuos. You know what Rabbeinu Bechaya writes? Amazing thing. Rabbeinu Bechaya writes in Parshas Emor, Vayikra Chav Gimel Pasuk Tezayin, that these 49 days that we're counting, he says Pesach is not an entity in itself. It's like days of Chol HaMoed. That's what he calls it, Chol HaMoed, from Pesach till Shavuos. And he says that's why Shavuos is called Atzeres. Atzeres means the last day. That's why it's called Shmini Atzeres. It's the last day of the 8th day of Yontif of Sukkot. So Shavuos is the Atzeres, the last day that we count. Why? Because from Pesach you got to get higher and higher. How do you get higher? You get higher by having that leiv toiv. But the Chavetz Chaim said two things. It's not only a leiv toiv, but it's also Torah. So I want to tell you a great story that should inspire every single one of you. There's a great sefer that's written in English. It's called In Search of Greatness. In Search of Greatness were the shmuzin of Rav Shlomo Freifeld. And Rav Shlomo Freifeld, he was a tremendous Talmud Chacham, very, very involved in Kiruv, and he opened a Beis Medrash Shar Yoshev that hundreds of people who never would have learned anything became big Talmid Chachamim. And he once told over a story that happened to him when he was a young man in the early 1950s. He went to Eretz Yisrael and he wanted to visit the Gadol Hador. In the early 1950s, you know who the two Gedolei Hador were in Eretz Yisrael? One was Rav Soloveitchik, the Brisker Rav. Who was the other one? Very good. The Chazon Ish. You're right. I'll tell you something. I'm so embarrassed to tell you this, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. The Chavetz Chaim passed away. Not the Chavetz Chaim. The Chazon Ish passed away in the early 1950s. I was a little boy then, and I was in Tervadas, and they called all the kids in the whole school to come down to the big Beis Medrash, and one of the Rabbeim was going to speak. I was a little kid. I said, a Chazan died? Like, what's the big deal? Why is everybody getting so excited about it? I thought, they said the Chazon Ish. I thought it was a famous Chazan or something. But of course, then I realized, who the Chazon Ish was as I got older. But Rabbi Freifeld went to the Chazon Ish, and he had a whole bunch of questions that he wanted to ask him. And he writes, and he says in the Shmuz, I had so many questions, but when I got in, I was so intimidated being in front of the God. I couldn't talk. I could not say a word. I was so intimidated. But then he said, Chazon Ish spoke to me. Listen to what the Chazon Ish said, and I want every bocha to remember this for the rest of your life. The Chazon Ish said, Gedolim of previous generations were not geniuses. Gedolim of previous generations were not geniuses. Now, he said 3 names. Those of you who are familiar with these 3 tzaddikim that I'm going to mention, these Gedolei Olam, will be shocked, just like I was. He says these 3 people were not geniuses. The Netziv, Reb Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, Reb Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, the Kovner Rav, and the 3rd one to me is the most shocking, because as you get older and you get into Paysach, you will not believe that the Chazon Ish said that he was not a genius. So Rav Freifeld points out, you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be that kid that gets all the hundreds in the class. And then many, many times when you're in yeshiva, your age, becoming bar mitzvah, around bar mitzvah, we look around and we see kids in the class that are smarter than us. And we think, oh, they're going to be the big Talmidei Chacham, and what's going to be with me? There's no way I can remember that, the way that kid remembers that Tosfos, or remembers what we learned. And listen to this. Rabbi Freifeld said, in order to be successful in learning, you need the 4 Ds, and I'm going to repeat it twice. Desire, dedication, drive, and determination. Desire, dedication, drive, and determination. And I'm telling you, even if you're getting 70s, and you're getting 75s, don't worry about it. Because you have that drive and that determination to learn. By the time you're 20 and 25, you're going to be a tremendous Talmid Chacham, much more than those kids that are getting 100. Because some of those kids who get to 100, they have a great memory. So fine, it's a big deal. But they're not your Geya and Torah the way you are. So I'm telling you, it's embarrassing to tell you this, but I don't know why I feel so close all of a sudden to all of you. Believe me, I didn't get the highest marks in my class, both in Hebrew and in English, except in geometry. We had the greatest teacher in the world. But otherwise, I got regular average marks. I certainly wasn't considered the smartest in the class. But I'm telling you, you don't have to be the smartest to be the most accomplished. Just keep on doing it with drive and determination and chazorah. And that's what the Chazon Ish was saying. You don't have to be a genius to be a big Talmid Chacham. Those people that are great are because they never gave up. And think about Rabbi Akiva. Imagine you were Rabbi Akiva, and you're the Rebbe of 24,000 Talmidim, and they're dying. They're dying in a period of 33 days. You know what the average is? 727 a day. Imagine, Rahman al-Itzlan, Rabbi Akiva is going crazy. He's coming to Tveria to give a hesped on this Ben Yochid, who was a big Talmid Chacham. Then they say, go to Tzfas. What about this guy who just got engaged? What about go to Yerushalayim? This guy knew Shas. And Rabbi Akiva is crying day and night. He's giving hespedim and all these Talmidim. So what if you and I were Rabbi Akiva? Would say, okay, Hashem, I get it. I'm out of here. Okay, you don't like the way I teach Torah? You killed all my Talmidim? I'm out of here. That's not what he did. The Gemara tells us he took 7 Talmidim, or the Medrash says 5 Talmidim, and he said, Rabbi said we taught them wrong. We should have taught them not only Torah, we should have taught them Derech Eretz. They didn't give kavod one to the other. And so he got these Talmidim and they taught other Talmidim, and the Medrash uses the Lashon Umalu Kol Eretz Yisrael Torah. The whole Eretz Yisrael was filled with Torah. Why? Because they didn't give up. And that's what I want to tell all of you. You're all young. I know you think you're old, but you're all young. You're spring chickens, every single one of you. Not the Rebbeim, but the Talmidim. And you're going to go through difficult things in life. Just remember, never, ever give up. Never give up on anything. You don't give up on your learning. Don't give up on yourself. You can do it. We could all be great. Every person can be great. Every person can be ma'od. And I'm just telling you, you could do it. Just like Rabbi Akiva didn't give up, we should never give up. Just like the Chavetz Chaim is telling us 2 things you got to do every day. You have to do a chesed for another person, and you have to learn Torah every day. And again, play ball. Don't be that kind of masmid that during lunchtime and during when you have off, you're in the base medrash. Enjoy life. You'll be that masmid when you get bigger. Just remember, play ball, enjoy life, be great in sports. I'm a big believer in kids being great in sports. Because if you're great in sports and you feel great about yourself, when you get older, you're really going to feel confident and be great in the things that are important. So don't make yourself crazy. Just make sure that when you're learning with tremendous asmada. You have the best Rebbeim, the best Chavrusas, and you do Chazara, and you have that drive and determination, and you'll be great. Don't worry about the other kids in the class. Worry about yourself. And if you have that drive and that determination, as the Chazon Ish and Rav Freifeld said, we could all be great. And so I just want to end just with this thing. I want to tell you a Gemara that puzzled me. Now, I know that when guys speak, or sometimes somebody gives a shir, somebody will use the expression, this Gemara bothers me. Never, ever use that expression. No Gemara should bother you. A Gemara is puzzling. I don't understand it. It's confounding. I need Havana in it. But never, ever use that derogatory expression, this Gemara bothers me. No Gemara should bother you. But I'll tell you something. This Gemara that I'm about to tell you puzzled me for many years. And I never saw a Mefarish that explained it until I saw the Maral. And with this we'll close. You know what the Gemara is in Yevamos Samach Beis Amud Beis? Rabbi Akiva lost the Talmidim. Why? 24,000 Shaloi Nogu Kavod Zebazeb, because they didn't give kavod one to the other. So I ask you, is that a reason to die? Everything, the Gemara says, everything Hashem does is Midah Keneged Midah. Nobody killed anybody. Nobody ate Yom Kippur. Nobody drove on Shabbos. Why should they die? Where's the Midah Keneged Midah? And then I saw the Maral. And just remember this Maral and think about it, and you'll see how true it is for yourself and for your friends. And the Maral in Yevamos says, Kashenoye kavod b'chaverai. When you give kavod to your friend, davar zeh hu etzem hachayim. That's what life is all about. Imagine if you walked into the yeshiva today and not one kid or one Rebbe said anything to you. A person would think, what am I living for? Nobody cares about me. When you give kavod to a person, to a friend, to a Rebbe, you validate that person. You make him feel special. But if you don't give kavod, you're taking away Chaim, and that's why they lost their lives. On their level, they should have been giving more kavod to each other. So I want to tell you 2 stories, and with that we'll close. You'll see what's taste when a Rebbe gives kavod. There was a Rebbe, Rabbi Lezer Geldseller, and he took his Talmidim in Brooklyn. He took them to Eretz Yisrael to visit a whole bunch of Rabbonim to get brachas. And one day they were on the bus, and he saw a Beis Olam, a cemetery, and he knew that there was a big tzaddik that was buried in the cemetery. So he said to the guys, "Listen, Chevra, I know we came to Eretz Yisrael to go to the Lebedike Rabbonim to get brachas, but there's a big tzaddik, and it's a schus to daven by the tzaddik, especially if you say the Divrei Torah. I'm going to tell the bus driver to stop." And he tells the bus driver to stop, and he says, "Okay, everybody off the bus. Every kid gets off the bus, except one boy. And as Rabbi Geltzel is getting off the bus, he sees the kid. He says, Yingala, you don't want to go into doubt by the tzaddik? So the kid says, Rebbe, I'm a kohen. I can't go into the cemetery. Rabbi Geltzel felt terrible. He forgot this kid was a kohen. So now everybody's inside, he's outside, and the kid feels like an outcast. Listen to the genius comment that Rabbi Geltzel made on the spot. He said, Yingala, I want to tell you something. He said, today we're all going inside and you're staying outside. But when we have the Beis HaMikdash, you're the one that's going to go inside to do the Avodah. We're going to be the ones that are outside. And all of a sudden the kid felt like $1 million. Here he was an outcast. Poor kid was a kohen. He couldn't even go in. He's staying on the bus. But then the Rebbe made him feel, no, you're the special one. How many kids here are kohenim? Okay. Don't forget. You might even be the kohen gadol. You never know. But the point is, you're special. Makes him feel special, right? And here's the second story, and with that we'll close. There's a Rebbe in Orchas Chaim in Lakewood. He's a principal, rather, of 2 grades, 3rd grade and 4th grade. And Lakewood, B'li Ayin Hara, in the 3rd and 4th grades, they have 10 3rd grades and 10 4th grades. So you're talking about a couple hundred kids. And the Rebbe once told us at a Torah Musar convention, he said that when a kid is sent out of class and he comes into the office, so this Rabbi Mandelbaum has to give him Musar, and then he told everybody, but when I send the kid back to class, I always use his first name, whether it's Shimi, David, Ruvain, whatever, and he says, David, don't forget I love you. And he sends him back to class. So he told over the story that one day, this kid, David, comes to the office. He was always there, a little bit of a troublemaker. And the Rebbe told him what he had to tell him, and he sent him back to class. 10 minutes later, Rabbi Mandelbaum walked out of his office. The kid's still standing there. He said, David, what happened? I sent you back to class 10 minutes ago. You could cry from this. And the little boy, David, says to his Rebbe, you forgot to tell me you love me. Imagine that. How sad is that? And who knows if that kid didn't get in trouble so many times just so that he should be able to hear from his Rebbe that the Rebbe loves him. A lot of kids don't hear it from their parents. And when I speak to parents, I give them mussar and I tell them, you got to tell your kid you love them every day. I'm not asking you by a raise of hands. How many get that? But one thing is for sure, that kid missed it. And that's why he wanted to hear from the Rebbe. But what do we see from that? That the Rebbe gave him life. And that's why those Talmidim didn't make it. Because the Maral is telling us that when you give kavod, you're giving life. So let's remember we have a big avodah from Paysach to Shavuos. Avodah of Chesed, avodah of Torah, and avodah of Ben Adam L'Chaveroi. The Rebbe should help that we should use these days from Paysach to Shavuos to grow in our Yiras Shamayim, Amos HaTorah, Amos Yisrael. And hopefully, Mr. Hashem will be able to say the Shechianu and Shavuos together with Mashiach and Yerushalayim HaKodesh. Thank you for inviting me and thank you for listening.